James Weldon Johnson begins his poem, The Creation, with these words. God stepped out on space, and he looked around and said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a world. The Bible doesn't say things quite like that, but it doesn't seem far-fetched to imagine loneliness as the reason the world came to be. Because once God gets started, you can hear God's pleasure grow as creation expands and all the good company makes an entrance. Let there be light, God says in Genesis, and there was light. And God said, oh, that's good. Let there be sky and seas and dry land, and it was good. Let there be sun, moon, and stars. That's good too. It begins with just a few words for each day, but as the Creator continues speaking and the days of the week unfold, God's own energy gathers momentum. By day 5, God has stirred up swarms of living things, plants with seeds, trees with fruit, birds of the air, monsters of the sea, cattle of every kind, and every creeping, crawly thing that lives on the earth. Creatures seem to leap up from the page, and each time it seems that God is immediately seized by love for what God has made. Seized by love for every created thing and every creature, from the tiniest blade of grass to the great white whale, from insects that swarm to galaxies that swirl. It's good. God says again and again, it's good. And then, when God gets around to making human beings, God says, very good. That's how the first story of creation in the Bible begins, chapter 1. But there's a second story, chapter 2. In the second story, some things are different. The order of creation is flipped, for one thing. A human being is made first rather than last. God creates not by speaking, but by kneeling down in the dirt and gently breathing life into the dust to make Adam, Adamah in Hebrew, meaning earth creature. And then, instead of saying, it was good, it was good, it was very good, we hear for the first time, it was not good. It comes as a surprise. And what's not good? Genesis says, it is not good that man should be alone. If God can't bear being lonely, God surely does not want us to be lonely either. This is important. Human beings are not meant to be alone. Human life is made for life together. We are made for each other. In the story Jane just read, Ruth seems to understand this truth. Naomi, however, has to be convinced. Their story begins well enough. When famine visits Naomi's home in Judah, she and her husband Elimelech pack up their little family and head out for more encouraging terrain. But then, just when they get settled in the land of Moab, Elimelech dies. Heartbroken, but not without hope, Naomi's sons marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. They restore the family's future. But 10 years go by, and no children are born, and then both of the sons die. Now, not only is Naomi's life devastated by loss, it also teeters on a dangerous cliff. In this ancient culture, a woman without a husband or a son is also without property, income, safety, or even identity. To underline this reality, the biblical text removes her name at this point. She is referred to simply as the woman. It seems she has lost everything. The promise that Moab had once so richly held is canceled by death. It's a famine of a different kind. Resigned to the fact that there is now no place for her in this foreign land, Naomi turns her face back to the town she came from, Bethlehem in Judah. As she makes plans for the journey, Naomi begs her daughters-in-law to stay behind and to let her make this trip alone. Rightly, she recognizes that Orpah's and Ruth's best chances for a new life remain in Moab, the land where they were born. Orpah reluctantly but reasonably agrees, and she bids a tearful farewell. Ruth, on the other hand, won't let go of Naomi. She clings to her. The text says she clings and refuses absolutely to leave her side. And the words she chooses to announce her decision are among the most enduringly tender in all of Scripture. They strike a chord so deep that many people know them without knowing where they came from. "Do not press me to leave you," Ruth says to Naomi, "or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." This is no sentimental speech. It's a radical decision and a startling commitment. From a cultural perspective, Ruth is risking death rather than choosing life. She abandons the security of her own family, disavows her own religious affiliation, and renounces her national identity. She stands alone. She possesses nothing. In clinging to Naomi, she is given no assurance from God or anyone else that things will turn out to be all right. In a world where life for women was dependent on their connection to men, Ruth has instead committed herself to a bond with an old woman who is so bereft, she feels even God has abandoned her. Ruth vows not to do the same. She will not abandon Naomi. Notice that she doesn't see any hope for their future either. What she can see, though, is love and connection. That's all she's got. It may not be everything, but it's the most important thing. Her love, her devotion, her fidelity, her sisterly solidarity. "It is not good for you to be alone," Ruth says to Naomi. "So I will go with you and stay with you. We were made to be with and for each other." In our own time, loneliness has reached epidemic proportions. For years now, Dr. Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States, has been investigating, speaking, and writing about loneliness as a public health matter. In his book, Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World, Murthy reflects on the finding that more than half of Americans say they feel lonely. The greatest numbers are among young adults. This was true even before our COVID isolation. Not surprisingly, the research tells us that chronic loneliness puts people at greater risk for mental health challenges, for depression and anxiety. And the stress of loneliness can cause a whole host of other medical problems: heart disease, dementia, stroke, premature death. Loneliness also impairs creativity and productivity in the workplace and affects how students perform in school. It impacts the level of civic engagement, the participation of people to make our communities better, to advocate, vote, help, serve. All that activity suffers when people feel disconnected. The prevalence of gun violence in our country is at least partly a consequence of our profound loneliness. And when you combine isolation with other experiences, the wildly rapid pace of change we are all living through, our immersion in profoundly negative news cycles, and our struggle to engage in constructive and respectful dialogue across differences, it's a recipe for despair. It is hard for any of us not to feel that everything in the world is broken. In sobering terms, Murthy says that one of the greatest challenges we need to undertake in the years ahead is the fundamental rebuilding of our connection to one another. If we want to reclaim lives that are fulfilling and enable all of us to flourish, we must grapple as a society with the question, what is our responsibility to one another? It's a moral question, Murthy says, a spiritual question that has implications for policies and programs and the life we share in common. It's a question about our values, about what kind of people we are, and about who we want to be as individuals, as communities, as a country. What is our responsibility to one another? Our future lies in how we answer and live out our answer to that question. The good news, the hopeful news, is that here we already know something about how to answer that question. We know it because the concern about what all people need in order to thrive sits at the very center of who we are. We know it in the covenant we make to each other when we receive new members into the church and in the promises that we make at baptism. I see it in the ways that you greet one another when you walk into the link on Sunday mornings and in the long lingering at coffee hour. I see your care and connection whenever you turn your loving attention to our kids, and even in the ways that you sing together, holding nothing back. It's in the vitality of our small groups and the grace gifts delivered to front doors, and in every kindness you extend to one another. It's in the ways we reach out to one another during times of illness and grief, sorrow and loss, and in all the prayers we say. That compassion and connection is evident in how this congregation seeks to align our purposes with our prayers. It's in your financial generosity, your hands-on service, your push to move into voter engagement and advocacy for public policy, and in all the ways that you show up to have serious and sometimes hard conversations about the climate crisis and racial equity and criminal justice and human rights. Our litany of examples could go on and on and on. We know about connection from the stories we tell, the stories passed down to us about a creator who says, it is not good for you to be alone, and who then gives us to each other. We know it from the story about a woman called Ruth who makes a brave commitment to a bereft widow named Naomi. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Of course, the story of Ruth and Naomi continues beyond the first eventful chapter. In Bethlehem, Ruth remarries. Naomi is relieved. New life is extended when Ruth has a son who grows up to have a son who goes on to become the father of David, the greatest ruler Israel ever had. And then much later, in his gospel, Matthew begins by tracing the lineage of Jesus down through the generations. In the family tree, Matthew pauses to insert the name Ruth. Her name stands out in the midst of a long line of men. The message is clear. From Ruth's vow to Naomi, from her risky decision and deep commitment, the life and ministry of Jesus comes to be born. And it's from his ministry that our life together as a community of faith becomes possible. And it's all these connections, the impulse to reach beyond loneliness to love, the stretch of commitment, a vow of faithfulness, the extension of a family tree, the passing down of a promise from one generation to the next, the joy of community, all these connections get lived out in our life together with one another as the church. They stitch us together in care for one another. They knit us together in compassion and concern for the whole world. They connect us to the one who looks at us, calls us good, and clings to us with love. And it's from that source that we are sent to connect our lives to others, to say to them, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Amen.